At this time, I'd like to call to the podium the valedictorian of the class of 2008, Jacob Stegman. Jacob's in his second year serving out at YCC, so we flew him in late yesterday, took him out to dinner and a show, made sure he got up this morning and made it here. Jacob would like to share a few words with you this morning. Welcome, Jacob.
It's safe to say that the person I was 5 years ago is not the one that stands before you today. I was born in a small suburb of Chicago. It never really stayed around long enough to remember where exactly. From the get-go, my father was never around, and in fact landed himself in prison for armed robbery not long after I was born. So in essence, it was just me and my mother, Robin Stegman. We skipped around Illinois for a while before my mother met a man by the name of Matt Sersha, of whom she married and went off to Washington to live with me still faithfully clinging by her side. Even though the memories of my youth are fragmented and widespread, the time I lived in Washington shall always remain clear and precious. For me, it was a time of ignorant happiness. We lived on a ranch-style farm with cows and everything. Yet more importantly, we lived as a family, seemingly invincible. This is an illusion many children live by, which is for the good of their innocence in the long run. I had a home, I had a stable school, and I had people around me that loved me. And to top it off, my baby sister was born around this time. To me, my happiness was unlimited, coming from the boundless environment in which I was thriving. Every morning, the sight of Mount Rainier, misted in purple, would stir the love and joy within, and I would often wander the ranch, playing games with myself and doing nothing in general. Yet even though all seemed flawless, the telltale signs of corruption were recurrent. Late-night arguments, drugs left under the sofa, and underlying abuse in all forms lurked below the surface of my understanding. Yet through these, my youth shone vigilantly. My happiness was cradled in nature. I would spend hours wandering through the meadows, mocking cows and climbing trees. During our brief stint in the capital of Washington, Olympia, a new hobby of mine would be to collect crabs, then bring them back for supper. To me, all was bliss until I was taken from my mother. One day, my mother left me with a friend overnight, which obviously didn't settle well with this friend. The next morning, the Department of Children and Family Services was at the door, ready to take me away. Within hours, I was in foster care with a strange family I didn't know, and a crop of kids who saw nothing but fresh meat. Thank God my stay was only for a single summer. Before my grandparents intervened, it would be appropriate to say I was floating without any direction. Without discipline and guidance, I had not matured the least bit for a child of the age of 8. I would frequently get into fights, throw tantrums, and be socially awkward in general. At this point, I never had a positive role model to show me the ways of life, to teach me that being a man wasn't just about broad shoulders and fist flailing. For many years, I was raised primarily by my mother. Through her addiction, which made it hard for her to sustain even herself, she tried her best to raise me. And although there was an abundance of love flowing from her heart, she couldn't raise a boy the way necessary it was for him to become a man. Through all of this, my grandparents were always there. When my mother needed help through consolation or even compensation, they were more than ready to step in, always. My mother and I even lived with my grandparents for a period of time, even though my mother did little to give back. So it is that much easier to understand my grandparents' reaction when they found out I was in foster care. They were so determined not to lose their grandson to negligence and poor parenting. So to make a long story short, they brought me to their home in Bloomington, Illinois, and adopted me not long afterward. But not all was saved. My grandparents had rescued me in a sense from the rotting environment in which I had lived, yet my internal stagnant growth still remained. I got into fights, and it was even harder for me to make friends. My grandparents did the best they possibly could. In fact, my grandfather frequented my school so often, even the hall monitors knew him on a first-name basis. And to add to my inner turmoil, my mother was murdered before I set foot into the 5th grade, the victim of a premeditated gunshot wound to the head. This only contributed to my delinquent, restless behavior, And add to it all, my originally loving and fertile relationship with my grandparents was deteriorating daily, with the barrage of arguments and lies I set forth upon them. During my last year of middle school, with the hopeful insistence of my grandparents, I realized I needed to make a change. Research was done and many options were uncovered. At one point, it was realized that the best choice was to ultimately live somewhere else. Even though this was a painful option, it was necessary if I wanted to save myself and the love that my grandparents and I had shared for so long. It was a necessary change, as the one 6 years earlier had been also. So our eyes were turned upon the option of a residential living facility. Various military schools and dorms for children with behavior disorders were considered, yet none seemed loving enough to foster a child who needed such care. And then we discovered Mooseheart. It seemed just a place for me to be, a place for such a change. It was almost by chance that Mooseheart caught my grandparents' eyes and stood out against the rest. For one, my grandparents had accidentally rendezvoused through the campus on the way back from a visit with a family friend. The campus had looked so beautiful and welcoming to them, even though they had no idea what type of facility that it really was. Years later, when Mooseheart was discovered in a search for a place for me to live, my grandparents remembered their stray adventure along its roads and immediately gravitated towards it. Also, the other reason Mooseheart swayed their vote was the immense feeling of love radiating from the campus. It seemed the perfect environment in which they could place their grandson. I don't remember that first cliche roll through the Mooseheart gates, yet I do vividly remember that first community picnic. There were people everywhere, and everybody was so friendly. I had always been so cautious in such social situations because I had never really felt welcome, either because others intentionally wanted me to feel this way or because I doubted myself just too much to intermingle with others. Yet I could feel the love flowing from every angle, and the smiles were profuse and directed towards me for once. Before, it had been such a strenuous process for me to make friends. I had to first fit into a stereotype I never wanted, and had to endure negligence in such relationships afterward because I wasn't the coolest of such stereotypes. But at Mooseheart, I was safe to be me, free to express myself without fear of alienation. This gave me a new playing field in which I could grow and mature, which is exactly what I needed. During my 4 years at Mooseheart, I matured rapidly. I was beginning to feel more comfortable with my new friends and my own personality. I was also beginning to feel more at ease with my own physical appearance, knowing that not everyone was created the same. It was at Mooseheart the lessons that my grandparents had taught me were able to shine through the cracks of my insecurity and pain. The very seeds that they had planted within me years before were beginning to grow, propelling me towards success and a new sense of leadership. Without my grandparents, I would never have had a stable base that Mooseheart could have worked upon, sculpting me into the person that I am today. From within, I was exploding with feelings of contentment, and happiness. Through the help of my teachers, coaches, and mentors, I was beginning to smooth the rough edges and exposing those long-buried splinters of pain. And through such guidance, I taught myself how to accept, and most importantly, how to love. Learning to love, although, is harder than it seems. When I grew up being kicked down, I was accustomed to brushing everything under the rug of my anger. I would always tell myself that worse things happened to other people, that I could just suck it up and deal, yet that never healed the wound that would bleed profusely within. These feelings would accumulate, swelling to the point I could no longer contain them. Up until the summer prior to my senior year, I was hardly aware of such an unhealthy veiling of emotions, let alone remedy them. That was the summer I spent in Yellowstone. The Youth Conservation Corps in Yellowstone was a program that had been in tangent with the moose for many years, since the great fires that occurred in the park in 1988. The park was desperate for resources, so the moose stepped in and donated roughly $1 million in order to aid restoration. Years later, when the park was back on its feet, the Moose members decided to funnel its entirety of its funds into the already existent YCC program. With the funds from the Moose, the Yellowstone YCC blossomed into a program guided towards helping youth grow, providing them with life-changing experiences. Due to the funds the Moose contributed to the YCC program, Mooseheart High School had 4 slots in which they could send their children. Aware of such an opportunity, I decided to apply to go the summer after my junior year. After 2 different application processes, And months later, I arrived at the small, homely YCC base camp nestled between the beautiful and towering mountains of the Yellowstone National Park. Upon my arrival, I stepped into an environment much like that of Mooseheart's, yet intensified manyfold. Nobody was afraid to be themselves, and no one would judge you for doing the same. Serenity and peace flowed from every seam the community created among the nature that swirls around you with every step you take. The smooth, clean air of the wilderness was exactly what I needed to sort through my stirring emotions. Only there did I feel at full peace with myself for the first time in my life. My own inner doubt was silenced by the roaring waters and hushing winds. Soon, I could feel the hate I had cradled for so long, exposed by the bright sun of my newly discovered freedom, fragmenting it and decomposing it. This was when I truly began to love, wholesome and liberated. Being in Yellowstone was like holding hands with God. Before I knew it, it was time to leave my newly found niche in this community that had taught me such a valuable lesson. It was hard, but with the promise of a spot on the crew next year and my newly developed sense of hope, I took my lessons with me, not forgetting what it meant to love and what it truly meant to be free. The next year, I excelled in many aspects. I received MVP for football and wrestling and was promoted to executive officer among the NJROTC ranks. I ultimately graduated valedictorian with a full-ride scholarship to Purdue University. But more importantly, I graduated with 20 brothers and sisters by my side. So here I stand before you with all those trials and tribulations of my youth behind me. But how does any of this actually affect any of you? I'll tell you, I'm the very fruits of your labor. Every day, the men and women of the Moose give generously, aim towards helping the children of the Mooseheart. But for many, it may seem that the resources are simply dropping off the face of the planet, lost to the unanimous funding necessary to become a member of the Moose. Do not lose any hope and passion in what responsibility, what position that you have assumed. I'm here to tell you now that without you among the crowd, every last one of you, I would not be standing here before you today, if alive at all. At the age of 8, the world was ready to relinquish all hope for me, ready to throw me into the well of lost youth, where I would become yet another ripple among the waves of such children. Look at me and realize that you have saved my life in every aspect possible. Because of the Moose fraternity, I am alive spiritually, emotionally, and quite perhaps literally, for the flow of blood still runs through my veins. And for this vitality, I'm eternally grateful. Grateful for the hot meals and the clothes upon my back that you placed for me. And I'm grateful for the brothers and sisters of Mooseheart. But most of all, I'm perpetually thankful for the opportunity you all have given me to love. Thank you.